Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Now, if you've been playing Dungeons & Dragons for a while and writing your own adventures, maybe over time things start to feel a little bit samey. Like, it's always go here, fight the monster, kill the thing, loot the stuff, help the people. And the same old combat and dungeon adventures can become redundant and boring.
So today, let's discuss a few ways to add more variety to keep your campaigns fresh and exciting. We're going to look at a few ideas to spice up your adventures, the dungeons, and the monsters that are involved in a typical adventure of D&D. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
Before we get into this week's topic, we just want to talk about our sponsor for this week, Torrents of the Spell Hoarder, a 500-page, high-level, seafaring adventure in a unique subtropical sandbox setting, which will take your characters from 16th to 20th level.
Embark on an epic quest to liberate the city of the deep sea elves from the oppression of the Kraken-arched necromancer. Find the 8 orbs of magic and liberate the island of the half-dragons.
This book is packed with tons of puzzles, naval combat rules, 25 dungeon and ship maps. There are 55 new monsters, 24 new subclasses, 20 magic items, and 22 spells and feats. It is jam-packed with great stuff for your game.
Find out more about the adventure by watching the actual play videos on Elderbrain's YouTube channel, or you can actually even download a 120-page free module sample.
And if you don't want to get the amazing physical book and accessories, you can also get it on Roll20. For those of you running at home, the amazing DM screen and the card pack have handouts for all the feats, NPCs, factions, and all that good stuff. And you can get the whole bundle at a great discounted price.
You can also use the code DD10 for a 10% discount on all products.
Thanks to Elderbrain for sponsoring this week's episode. Check out Torrents of the Spell Hoarder down in the links below.
And now, on to the rest of the episode.
So the first thing that you should do to mix things up in your adventures is use different types of environments. Goblin caves, ruined temples, your standard tomb dungeon, or a roadside ambush are fun, but they are not enough variety for an entire campaign.
Don't be afraid to move your adventures to a new setting. Just because you start the adventure in a small village and the nearby mines doesn't mean you can't branch out to other locations further away from home.
Try something that is wildly contrasting. If you've been to the dungeons, get out there. Go outside, touch some grass, go to the wilderness.
And if you've been in the desert, you can try switching that up with them stumbling upon an urban location or moving to a city or town for their next adventure.
And even if your campaign is set in a city, there's a wide range of different locations, castles, markets, gardens.
You could do sewers, canals, docks, cemeteries, manor houses, cathedrals, and even temples.
Fortifications, museums, workshops, factories, guild halls, arenas. Even if you do like to do more of those dungeon crawl type environments, having different types of dungeons with different ways that they've been constructed, from the tomb to the prison to the fortress or the temple, all of these different dungeon types, especially if they're set maybe in different biomes, can really just add a touch of freshness that stops making it feel like, yes, we're just exploring another stone featureless dungeon made by dwarves.
A great example is even if you're running something like a mega dungeon, which sort of feels like, well, how do I switch things up in a mega dungeon? It's one massive location. But I actually want to point to the first Diablo game as a great idea here. In Diablo, you start in a church, and really, Diablo is just a mega dungeon. The first one, you're in the same location, just going deeper. But every few layers, something new and unique happens. Things change as you get deeper and deeper in that location. Even the Dungeon of the Mad Mage really mixes it up. You start in one type of setting, and even though you're just going lower, you get some really weird and fantastical locations, which actually brings us to our next point. when you're thinking of designing your adventures, you are playing D&D, which is a game full of magic and mysticism and all sorts of zany alternate planes of reality and spells that can do crazy things. So try focusing on the fantastic, weird, and otherworldly.
Transform mundane locations with magic, literally, that change the conditions into something new and unexpected. For example, perhaps the location is flooded with water or has sunken below the surface completely.
You could have a volcanic eruption or earthquake that has ravaged the location.
Maybe it's been buried under a landslide or an avalanche.
The location could be floating in the sky, or an evil curse has been bestowed on the area.
Maybe magic is acting wild and you have a wild magic table for it, or even magic is dead in some areas and spells don't work.
The location has been sucked into a pocket dimension or a time loop.
Or you can combine two environments which normally would not be found together, like an underground forest in the dungeon.
You could have a planar rift or a portal that appears, causing extraplanar creatures to invade the site, or the players have to go through that to a different plane of existence.
Maybe a plague or disease or fungal infestation or an alien organism is like doing like the sort of Zerg creep all through the dungeon, and has infected the area.
Quirky doesn't need to mean random. Magic in the setting allows for many fantastical things and ways to traverse planes and distances in the blink of an eye. On top of that, a lot of the things that we mentioned there are not necessarily magical and weird. Just having natural things occur to the location could change things up.
Yeah, so your everyday location can be utterly transformed just by having some sort of cool event, disaster, or phenomena occurring there. And what's even better about it is it helps tell the story of what's happened. If we are setting the dungeon in a sunken temple to a forgotten god, why has it sunk into the swamp? What happened here? How do the creatures that live there live? By developing the location with a magical phenomena, you actually do the work of making it cool and informing the story.
The next thing that you want to consider is planning encounters that involve all three pillars of play. You don't want to rely on just combat in your environments. You also want to make sure that you're creating encounters around hazards, traps, puzzles, and incorporating mysteries.
Also, having a role-playing opportunity or social elements as an exploration as part of the adventure site is really important. Are there NPCs to talk to, learn information from, or who might hinder or help the players in their adventure?
And when it comes to exploration, don't just have one entrance into your dungeon. Can they find a hidden passage or a secret entrance, or can they scout the enemies or bypass encounters? Think of ways that exploring the location or the adventure site can actually help the players plan and execute their approach or their way through the dungeon.
Yeah, having a non-linear adventure site, even if it's a pretty mundane location, can be a great way to just make the entire encounter or an adventure way more interesting and give a lot of variety, just because the players have so many different choices of how they can navigate what's happening.
And while they're exploring this unique and interesting location, you want to make sure that you're using diverse monsters with new abilities. One thing that I tend to do as a default when I'm planning an encounter is I say, okay, well, this encounter is taking place in the swamp. That's where my adventure's going. Let's look at all the monsters that belong in a swamp. But not every swamp needs a gang of trolls. Yeah, you might include them in there. You might include the bullywugs and the giant crocodiles and all of the things that you would find in the swamp. But you can also have some fun here. Flip through the various monster books and find something you've never used before. If you collect minis, look at your minis, pick up the one with the most dust on it, brush it off, and ask yourself, can I use this in the upcoming adventure?
I rely very heavily on humanoid NPCs as adversaries in my own campaigns, but it is really important to flip through the monster manuals and use some fantastic creatures instead. It's very easy to fall into a routine as a DM, as making all your adventures about facing humanoid foes. So everything is fighting goblins, fighting orcs, fighting cultists, fighting bandits, fighting the evil army, fighting the hobgoblins, or some variant of people with weapons and spells. And you can mix this up a little bit more by using a more diverse skill set in your NPC adversaries, like not using just the fighters that are going to charge at the party with swords, or the barbarians that are going to attack them with axes, or wizards that are going to fireball them, and maybe occasionally have an encounter with enemies that are like monks or assassins or druids. Those can really mix things up, but not nearly as much as using monsters that have wildly different abilities that are things that the player characters can't even do.
Your cool army that's approaching could have a number of different monsters at their disposal. Even the Orcs of Mordor had cave trolls, and they had their warg riders, and there was a lot of different monsters and creatures that were involved in that army. So think of ways that you can spice it up. And when you're planning your environments, just because it's a cave in the woods doesn't mean that it needs to be an owlbear or a troll inside. A cave in the woods could have a number of unique and interesting monsters that tell a unique and interesting story. It could be a beholder living in that cavern, or a genie, or a group of modrons. You ask yourself, why are they there? You can use the monsters to inspire unique and fantastical stories.
Sometimes my method is I just look at my collection of miniatures and I pick the one with the most dust on it and be like, I haven't used this guy in a while, so I should figure out some way to use them. And that wild contrast can add an interesting variety and an unexpected encounter that really keeps your adventures quite fresh. And it doesn't require a lot of work from you in really trying to be completely original all of the time. Because it can be a challenge to think that you always have to have a new story or a new plot twist or be really elevating your game in some front. But the truth is that a little bit of variety isn't hard to accomplish by using just different environments, different monsters, and different types of encounters. This sort of general rotation is usually more than enough to keep things fresh from week to week over the course of a long campaign, rather than having to always constantly thinking like you have to come up with an idea that has never been seen before.
And if you're combining all of these elements, you actually already have the 3 steps to creating something unique and exciting. Maybe instead of your next adventure being let's go to the mines and fight goblins, you think, well, there's a nearby volcano and there's a city inside of the volcano. That city's having problems because something has been kidnapping the people in the volcano city. They think it's probably the red dragon because of course a red dragon lives in the caldera of a volcano, but it turns out it's a beholder that's been kidnapping people because he collects specimens of people because he's a collector. So you have this sort of different idea for an adventure based in a unique and cool location with a monster that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find there. And all of that makes a very unique and compelling story. You can use that one if you want, but there's so many ways that you can mix and match. What's the cool location? What's the unique monster? Who are the interesting NPCs, and what's the problem that they have to face? Even if you don't have an idea for your next adventure, picking a unique location and an interesting monster that is different than the location will give you enough to ask the question, well, why are we going to this unique location and using this interesting monster? What's the story here? And now you're cooking with gas on making a unique and interesting adventure. So if you have used these ideas to create a unique and interesting adventure site with an interesting monster, I want to hear about your cool ideas in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here, please consider joining our Patreon. The links are down below.
And if you want to see us visiting a lot of cool and interesting locations within one city, you can check out our original campaign in the Worlds of Drakenheim. We are continuing that campaign in the wider world every Tuesday evening right here on YouTube. You can check out all of the episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty of advice for Dungeon Masters right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.